thanks everyone for coming. I do truly appreciate it. I love when they give me the best slot in the entire schedule because everyone knows that we are all most awake and energized immediately after lunch on the last day of the conference. Yeah, that's me too. So I hope you brought coffee. If you didn't, well, that's on you. I mean, come on, this is not your first rodeo. You know to bring coffee right after lunch to these sessions, but I will try to keep it lively and interesting. I find it fascinating. Hopefully you will as well, but let's get rolling. So this is the talk. Thanks for coming to the talk on All Paths Lead to Production, or as I like to say, a fast-paced deep dive into the many ways to deliver Spring Boot apps to prod. I like short titles. So I work with Spring, right? Short method names, everyone knows that. So the titles kind of align with that. Boy, that was a little bit of a joke, but it's so much based in truth. So I get one smile. I'll take that. Thank you very much. I owe you a coffee now, too. My name is Mark Heckler. I am a principal cloud advocate of Java and JVM languages with Microsoft now. Those of you who remember me from a previous life, I was on the Spring team at Pivotal, which then got absorbed into VMware, and I was also there. I left, I guess, just a little over a year ago, so 2021. So it's, yeah, something, was that last year? Time is such a fluid concept since the pandemic hit. So it's kind of like I'm thinking what was yesterday, what was the weekend, what was last year. I think we're all there. Hopefully we'll get back to some sense of normalcy soon in terms of calendaring and stuff like that. But yeah, I still work with Spring a lot. I still work with a lot of the Spring team members a lot. I just do it from the other side of the aisle, so to speak. Microsoft, for those of you who don't know, Microsoft wants to be your platform of choice, your destination of choice, regardless of your tool chain, language, development environment. Folks a lot of times see a Microsoft person using a Mac, running IntelliJ to write Java code, and then they'd never hear a word I say after that. They just go, doesn't compute. But again, it's a matter of use what works for you and to get the job done. So that's why I'm here. That's why I'm talking about Spring Boot, and that's why I'm using all the weird stuff that you wouldn't typically associate with a Microsoft person. But if you have any questions, comments, or feedback, if we have time at the end, I'll happily take them. If not, please catch me afterward. If you're like me, you think of the best questions, comments, or feedback 10 minutes after you walk away, and you're like, I can't, where did he go? Or I can't go back because I'm in the next session or whatever. We have a short time here together today, but we have hopefully nearly infinite time afterward. So reach out to me. Email is fine, markheckler@microsoft.com or markthehecklers.com. Twitter is better. For those of you who know me from Twitter, you know that I live on Twitter all the time. So I check email sporadically. I'm on Twitter like 24/7. If you don't know me on Twitter, if you don't follow me on Twitter, I guess first question is why? I tweet good stuff and no terrible joke. Well, okay, once in a while a terrible joke. But generally it's good, fun stuff and great tech, like I think great. So I share a lot. So follow me on Twitter. If you don't want to have questions, comments, or feedback shared with the whole entire world, my DMs are open, so just DM me. It's all good. So a bit about me. I am obviously an advocate of Java and JVM languages. I am an author, a published author, and I'll get into that a little bit more as we go. I am an architect and developer and a Java champion, Java 1 Rockstar, Groundbreaker ambassador, Kotlin developer expert, and a licensed instrument-rated pilot. I did not fly here for this event, just due to kind of a confluence of weird circumstances, but it's fun. It gives you a different perspective on the world, literally a different perspective on the world. So yeah, who knows? I'll be probably flying up here pretty soon. I just took the train this time. It's all good. So anyway, here's the book. Now, I had contributed content and code to some friends' books. I had co-authored a couple of books with dear friends, people I respect and really enjoy working with. And I swore because there's a lot of work, staggeringly mind-numbing amounts of work that go into writing a book. And I co-authored a couple of these, and I thought, wow, that was a lot of fun, but it was too much effort. So I will never, ever, ever solo author a book. And then the pandemic hit. So I thought, why not? Why don't I write a book? So I did. So if you're interested in finding out more about it, you can follow the link here, bit.ly/springbootbook. That will get you a free trial to Safari Books Online where you can kick the tires on it for, I think, 7 days, if I remember right. And that's enough time to see if you like it, if it's useful to you or not, that's fine. The book also has a Twitter account, So I would point you to that. The book has great things to say on Twitter, so follow there. And it also has the bit.ly link on that as well. So if not, that's cool. All the examples in that, by the way, are in both Java and Kotlin, except for the data feed. I just left that as Java because it didn't seem like there was a lot of utility in converting just the data feed and doing that as well. But it's all both. So if you're kind of interested in seeing how the other half lives, check that out as well for that reason. Pardon me. You know what? And I really didn't. Yeah, I'll save the photo at the end. I surely won't forget, right? Anyway, so the plan for the day. I love a good quote, and this is by Leonard Bernstein, the former conductor and composer, but former conductor of New York Philharmonic Orchestra, who once said, "To achieve great things, two things are needed: a plan and not quite enough time." And I think we can check both those boxes today. So, with that, let's get started. The actual plan for the day. I want to kind of showcase some different options and hopefully not go down too many bunny trails, but cover a few things as well that will get us into some interesting thoughts on the ways that you can package and deploy your Spring Boot applications. So we start with the executable jar. That's the one typically people think of, right? The fat jar, the Uber jar, whatever you want to call it. Spring Boot developers and the community typically refers to it as the executable jar, simply because you don't have to do the java-jar x-cp blah, y, and fill in the bunch of stuff where you're pointing at all your dependent libraries. And that's fine. We're going to be talking about and showing that. And then I'm going to launch into the, quote, fully executable jar. I'm not making this up. If you're not familiar with this term, it's in the Spring Boot documentation. It's not overly talked about because, I mean, let's just be really clear. There aren't a whole lot of compelling reasons for it. It's a nice thing. You'll probably see some like, oh, that's kind of cool. But it's not like it's going to have wide applicability and wide use. But it's there, right? So it's good to know about. Then we're going to explode some jars, or expand or extract, or whatever you want to say. But exploding jars sounds like exploding kittens. The game, not the real thing. So I thought it was cool. We're going to talk about and do, because all these things we're going to do live, we're going to build a JVM-based container image. And that is good, right? That works out really well. It's kind of that all-purpose, all-platform targeting deployable unit. I know, and this is something I'll probably throw in as we go, I know the JVM-based anything was supposed to be that. However, many target environments that we target use Kubernetes or some kind of an orchestrator that expects a container image. And this is where these type of things really come in. They become the cross-platform unit of choice in many ways. So full support there. Then we're going to get into the really fully executable application and build a container image around that. And then if there's time, I'm going to do a couple other things that I think are pretty cool as well, but we'll have to see how that goes. So let's code, right? Hopefully it won't go like this, but you just never know, right? So I actually intended to pop this up before because I want to make sure I have my notes so I don't skip over anything particular. This is the first time I've done this particular talk, and I can do it all without consulting anything, but I'm afraid if I skip an item on my checklist, I will really be disappointed in myself. So I want to make sure I don't do that, all right? So let's just do that, and that way we have all this stuff, and that way we also won't waste time. All right, I'm going to start here. Everyone's familiar with what this is, right? This is the Spring Initializer. This is the easiest way to start building Spring Boot applications. You can do it other ways. You can curl it, you can HTTP it, you can build your own custom bespoke artisanal Spring Boot applications, but it's not very efficient. This is arguably the most efficient way to get started. And I just popped that open, and I just splattered my glasses. So, funny story, a former colleague of mine on the Spring team, who will remain nameless, one time was at was it here? If it is, don't say names, please, from pre-pandemic. But there was a Spring Tour stop, and I want to say it was Chicago, maybe not. But he got up, and he was doing his whole presentation, and he had iced tea, sitting up here. And he got all the way close to the end, within, 5 minutes from the end. And he knocks over the tea right into literally his month-old MacBook Pro. And he's quick. I mean, reflexes of a cat. And he grabs it and pours it out. But as he's doing it, it goes, phoom, and goes black. So the screen is just dark, and he gets this look on his face like, oh my gosh. And then it comes back up, and he's like, so he thinks he's won at this point, right? It's the old technology 1-2 punch. So he thinks he's won until it goes, phoom, again. And at that point, we all knew he was going to be getting a new Mac and an earful for ruining his existing new machine, basically new machine. So I make it a point to, one, always have something that seals, right? And two, try to keep it away, but sometimes that is harder to do than that is. Once in a while, though, these things, when you pop them open, if you don't do it at a distance or like covered, it will splatter you. So, but at least the Mac's safe. All right, so I'm going to start building the project, and this is going to be really a dead simple project because I want to focus on, again, the path to prod, right? I don't want to focus on the application. I'm just going to give it enough interesting stuff that we can play with it, and then we'll deploy it in different ways. So I'm going to use Maven for my build system because I took off my hoodie, so I'm not feeling very hipsterish, so I won't use Gradle. It's all Maven today. I'm going to use Java for my language, again, staying fairly middle of the road. I'm going to use current version of Spring Boot for the time being. And I'm going to change a few things. Make this the hecklers.com. That's my domain. Why not? And I'm going to say all paths because all paths lead to production, right? So all paths lead to prod. All right, so using jar packaging because after all, this is the 21st century. Let's keep it real. And Java 17. So I'm going to add some dependencies here. Again, keeping it very simple. I'm going to bring in Spring Web. Typing is already off the charts, so that's great. And I'm going to bring in Spring Native. Now, this will change with the version of Spring Boot 3.x coming up, 3.0 initially. And hopefully we'll have time to get into that. But this is where we are with the current production versions of Boot. So I'm going to generate the project, then I'm going to comment out the native stuff to get started, and we'll go from there. So just save this, and then I'm going to extract this. And of course, it didn't open up. Let's see. That's fine. We can get there from here. And then we'll open this up in our favorite IDE, NetBeans. Kidding. Any NetBeans fans here? NetBeans is a great editor. I've used it for a long time. It is. It works really well with Spring and with Java. It's a great editor. I use IntelliJ. It's also a great editor. It's good. You know, it has great support. VS Code, as you might imagine, I use, and it's good and getting better every day. Eclipse is, well, it's also an editor. It's not a great editor. I mean, let's be real. No, Eclipse has everything. I always liken it to the Swiss Army knife that has like 5 million blades. It has everything. You just can't find the one you need. I can't. Maybe that's my shortcoming. Probably is my shortcoming, but anyway. I use Vim, by the way. VI? Any VI fans? Just please have some self-respect. Don't use Emacs. Just don't. All right, so we're going to take a look at the POM. I'm going to actually, again, comment out a few things because we don't need them now. Nobody got them left on the Emacs comment, so that's a good sign. All right, so yay. I'm going to comment out a few things here. The configuration section here for our plugin, for our Spring Boot Maven plugin. I'm going to comment those things out. And then we don't need the ahead of time plugin, so we'll comment that for the time being. And then I think that's it. I think that's all we really need to do. Yes, so I'm going to go ahead and refresh that, and let's go to our code. And I'm going to, again, keep this fairly simple. I'm just going to create a rest. I'm so used to now using an external keyboard, thanks home, that now it's my fingers don't line up right here. So I'm going to call this the all paths controller. And we're going to have a few things here. Get mapping, I'm going to just map that to the root. We'll return a string. So we'll just do a liveness check, right? Return all is well and alive in Chicago. All right, so extra emphasis with the extra exclamation points. Now I am also going to do another endpoint just for fun, because why not? So I'm going to create a get mapping. We'll call this my randomizer. That's always kind of fun, right? So we'll return an int, get random number, and we need something. So I'm going to just create this. I'm going to do a random, rnd equals new random. And we'll just use that to just return rnd.nextInt. and we'll bound that to 1,000 just to keep it interesting. Okay, so if we start this, and let's see, I don't have a terminal window open, so let's open a terminal window. Let's see, let's close that, close that, close that, close that. Wow, anybody have any weird issues with the Macs now that the latest update came out? When I restart my Mac, it doesn't open anything, and then when I open something, then it opens all the old windows. Seems really interesting choices here, but user hostile development. All right, so let's go here. And let's see, where did I put this? All paths? No, desktop, right? We are good. We're right there. Okay, so I'm just going to use HTTPy, hit 8080. I'm going to do a bear so we just get just the response. All is well, alive and well, shouldn't it be? Wow, it's been a tough month this week. Okay, so I'm going to go to randomizer. Nobody caught that, huh? Tough month this week? Okay, all right, well. It is did I mention this is the slot right after lunch? It is, yeah, we're all feeling this, I can tell. Okay, so everything's working, and let's see, what did I want to go back and see what, oh, I know what I wanted to do. And I need to actually build this from externally so I can see it, because if you look under target, we don't have our actual, and I'll show you why in a moment, we don't have our jar file here. So let's go ahead and build it out here, clean package. All right, and while that's doing that, now is the time, because I have a moment for photos. So I'm going to, I take terrible photos, by the way. If there's anybody who can mess up an automated stabilized, it's me, right? But I'm going to take this photo, or these photos, and we'll see what happens. So let's see. Everybody over here say spring. Spring. All right, and over here, let me move over here. I should have probably saved this for the Docker build, right? Okay, spring. All right, okay, so probably neither of those will turn out, but hope springs eternal. Okay, so same thing, just so nobody thinks I'm pulling anything funny, java jar, jar target, all paths. We run that. I'm gonna just fire up another window, HTTPy 8080-B, works, randomizer, works. We're all good, okay. So now, the one thing that I wanted to show you before I get out of here is this, ls-l target. So if you notice what the permissions here are, well, okay, two things. One, you see a very small jar, the jar.original, which is just the Java jar. And you can run that if you -cp and all that stuff. But here is your executable jar. It has a little bit larger file size, as you can tell. But that's because it brings in all of your jars and a little other stuff, and it brings them in where you can run this independently, do the java-jar, not worry about class path and all that. But if you notice the permissions, it's 644, right? It's read-write, read and read. So you can't run it by itself, which will lead us to our next part of the presentation. But before I do that, I want to just copy target all paths to here, because that way I don't have to rebuild it to go into subsequent stages for stuff I want to do. Okay, so the next step, the fully executable jar. And I did do the air quotes, if anybody didn't catch it, fully executable jar, because it's a weird name, right? But it's here, so we'll talk about it. It's very easy to do. You just add executable true. And that's it. That's really all it takes. So I'm going to go out and we'll just do a Maven package, and we'll repackage it. I started 5 late, so by my ciphering, that gives us till what, 210-ish? We'll go with that. Okay, so we have a build success. So it's really hard and tiresome to type this, right? Java-jar. Right? Isn't that, oh, that's gruesome. That's a lot of work. I bet you've often wondered, gosh, wouldn't it be great if I could, come on, wouldn't it be great if I could just, there we go, if I could just do this and save, what is it, 8, 9 characters? That would be awesome, wouldn't it? Well, you can. That's the fully executable part. Now, I'll show you, just to verify it works, and then I'll show you kind of how the sausage is made. All works just the same. So what's the diff, right? Because we don't have to put the java-jar. Well, let's start by just doing this. Let's do a less of the former, the non-fully executable, but the executable jar, as it typically is produced by Spring Boot build. So it may be a binary file. Do you still want to see it? Sure, let's see it. Lo and behold, it is. It's bytecode. Now you can still see some things occasionally. You can see some directory paths. You can see class names. So you can kind of see it and look and go, wow, that looks like a jar, right? But it's binary. So that's what you get with the standard executable jar. It's got all your junk in there, your stuff in there, but you can't really do much with it. Now, let's go ahead and do the same thing. Well, the first thing I want to do, I guess, is just do ls-l target. And you notice this is red now because, look at the permissions, it's fully executable. So the operating system looks at this as an executable file, right? And why is that? Well, let's take a look here. Let's do a less target all paths. Now look at this. Before I get into this, I have to ask, does anybody know how Java, when you do a java-jar, how it reads a jar file? Anybody want to guess? Top to bottom, bottom to top? Who thinks top to bottom? Makes sense, right? How does an operating system read a file? It opens it, starts at the beginning of file, reads to the end of file, and it stops. Very simple, right? Who here thinks backward, bottom up? You're right. I don't know why. I don't remember. If I ever knew, I certainly don't remember. I probably never found out. But when you do a java-jar, Java reads your jar file from the bottom up, from the end of, basically end, till it reads backwards till it hits that end of file marker, which allows you to do some interesting things, right? So in this case, we've pre-pended. I say we, I didn't do this. The Spring Boot team early on did this, before I even got to Pivotal. But they added a bash file, a script to the top. So you see the shebang bin bash? So your operating system, as long as you set that with 744 or 7, anything, your operating system will look at it and go, hey, that's a file I should be able to execute. Let me open it. Oh, look, it's a bash file. So then it goes through. Now here's why I say it's a little misleading for the fully executable. That part is true, right? But if you go down through here, it's a startup script or a shell script. But if you get down into here, let me back up, you can see that it's looking for a Java home right here. Right? Kind of makes sense. We go on down a little farther and we see, let's see if I can find it here. Whoops, I went too far. Still went too far. Ah, there it is right at the top. So what's it doing here? su-s, then shell-c, Java executable, so java-jar, and it's running this with your arguments, et cetera, et cetera. So you still need a JVM present. So it's not really fully executable, it's just sort of really almost fully executable. So the kind of the impetus for it, the reasoning is that you can put it in a cron job, you can put it in startup scripts, and that's true, but it really only saves you a few characters, and you can still do a lot of the same things, even with the java-jar. So I don't know, it's an interesting option, but in most cases you probably aren't going to use it. But it does work, right? So let's see. Before I launch on, let me just double check I've covered everything I wanted to. Yes, yes, and yes. Yep, so let's explode some jars. All right, so I'm going to do a make dir exploded, and we'll just cd into that. And then I'm going to do a jar-xvf, and we'll just grab our original here, and we'll take a look at that. So let's tree this. So here is what this looks like, and this, we'll come back to why I'm showing you this. It looks very similar to something you'll see later on, but you can actually expand this. Now, when Spring Boot first came out, I don't know if anybody used Spring Boot when it was like 1.0 or even before then, it was really novel. There had been like Uber jars before then, but they were done via shading. So what would happen is you would have a lot of different jars, different libraries in your class path that you go, well, I want to use those things, but I want to make this one deployable unit. So what it would do, the shade plugins typically would do, and there were a few of them, probably still are a couple at least, but they would tease apart your jar files, and then they would kind of sift them and bring them all together into one final jar that would execute based on loaders and things like that. What happened though, and what can happen, is that if you have multiple jar files, multiple dependencies, which let's face it, we always do, if you have the same name for a class file in different jars that you're bringing in and they conflict, what then? So that's a problem, potential problem. You also can have a licensing problem. And I'm not a lawyer, but there are some bits of software, including libraries that have licenses that say you can't modify our software in any way. Well, what do you think extracting files from a jar is and repackaging them in some other format is? So that may be a problem, may not. Again, not for me to say. But Spring Boot took a really novel approach. They said, look, let's take all of the jar files and pull them in as is, and we'll bring them in and we'll read them whole within our entire .jar file, our executable jar file, which also gives you the ability to do this. I can extract these, and they're all extracted, but they're unharmed, they're unchanged, they're untouched, which is pretty special, right? So when you do this, let's see, you can also, you can run it this way. So I can do a Java, and I'm going to do a, how does this work? So org, there we go, jar launcher. And it actually starts up a little faster. This is what your IDE typically does, by the way. It doesn't. That's why I had to go out and do a Maven clean package, because it's running it expanded, just like this. So if I go here and just check to make sure that this works, randomizer, of course, works. It took me a little while to start. Same thing here. So pretty cool, right? There's another way to do this, by the way. Actually, I think there's a third way, but it's a little more obscure. But this one is a fairly common way of doing it. So if I do a Java-CP for class path, I do a boot env classes, and I'm just going to add boot env lib star. And then if I do the main application class, so con dot the hecklers dot all paths dot, and I don't remember what the name is, so we'll just go back and look. And we'll double check here, all paths, grab that. This works too. Now, it's similar to the jar launcher. However, the jar launcher is a better option. There are a couple or three different reasons, but the big reason is because when you run it this way, you can load dependencies in various different orders, which most of the time doesn't matter. But when it comes to tech deliverables, many times we'll have some weird sporadic problem, right? And if everything is done consistently the same way every time, it's much easier to troubleshoot, diagnose, and resolve than if you go, well, it happened once, but I can't reproduce the error. So you want a consistency, right? So this will work. I would do it, but I think we're getting a little closer on time than I want. What I do want to show you, though, is if we go into, let's see, I'll just cat it, boot env class path, there we go. So when you do the jar launcher, it uses this every time to load consistently the same way every time. It's a better option. So just so you know, a little trivia / useful knowledge there. Okay, is there anything I wanted to cover about this before I move on? No, we're good there. So let's build a JVM-based container image. Again, this is how many of us will deploy our applications going forward, right? So let me go out of here. I'll do a Maven, spring, boot, build, image. Okay, so this will build a JVM-based application image. It's using cloud native build packs. And this happens pretty quickly. This is a very rapid process. Usually it takes about 40-ish seconds, and then we're up and running. Cloud native build packs, if you're not familiar with them, have you used Heroku before, anybody? You know that in the old Heroku days, you would provide a jar file and they would build a container around it. Cloud Foundry, same idea. This kind of builds your container image the same way. So we have it built. Let's go ahead and do a docker run --rm --name all paths jvm -p, and we'll just expose our port here so we can get to it. All good things. And then I'm just going to grab this because it says, hey, I successfully built this image. Paste that, and they're off to the races. And we can see that took a long time to start, right? It took 2.255 seconds for the application to load, under 3 seconds to start. So it's pretty good. So let's go ahead and test that, make sure we can get there from here. And of course, it works, because things always work perfectly well in demos. They never break. Yep. Sure. But it's fine. This works, so that's good. Now the next thing I'm going to do, just for comparison, is I want to build a native executable and put that into a container. So let me make sure I haven't missed anything. Oh, I did miss something. Before I do that, I want to actually show you how what I showed you earlier about the extraction ties into all that. So let me do that really quickly. So make dir docker cd docker. This is why I check my notes, because otherwise I blithely skip over this and then we miss out. So if we do a java dash, d jar mode equals layer tools dash jar, and we'll go all paths. So there is a layer tools tool library that lets you kind of get a look at what happens when you build a Docker image, a container image, but it also is used for that purpose, right? So this gives you a little hint behind the scenes, under the covers, whatever. And just by running this, it will tell you, well, here's your usage, which we did, and here are your available commands. So I'm going to list this, and it'll show what will happen if we do the extract. So these are your layers. Now, early on, when people were starting to build Docker images and container images, they would take a Spring Boot executable jar and they would just dump it in there. Not terribly efficient, because every time it changed, you had to rebuild the entire container image. And as we know that if you can break that into layers in terms of things that change a lot, all the way up to things that change very little, or I should say down to things that change very little. I guess up if you're showing it on the screen. So there are layers that are defined by default, right? Because your application code will change far more frequently than snapshot dependencies, which we're not using for this example, but we could. And those will change more frequently than the Spring Boot loader, which will probably change more frequently than dependencies like Jackson and things that you use as dependencies in your Spring Boot application. The jars underlying there won't change very often at all. So if we break that into layers, it's far more efficient if we have to rebuild. And you can tweak these, you can change these, but these are the defaults. Now, where are those defined, you might ask? I'm glad you asked that. So if I go back over here where we were to exploded, and we look at cat boot layers.idx, you can see that right there. So this is basically what it's using. It's going to break things into 4 layers: application, snapshot dependencies, Spring Boot loader, and dependencies, which we see. Let's see, where did that? Oh, wrong one. There we go, right there. So let's go ahead and let's build this, right? No, actually, I want to extract this. So extract. And we look here now, and we have the same thing. So if we tree this, again, it looks very familiar to us with a few minor changes. We've shifted things, again, to be in those layers. So the application code includes our application properties, our application classes that we have built into our app code. We have our POM information, if you will, the properties in XML. We have dependencies, which are our libraries that are used, our dependent libraries. We have snapshot dependencies. We don't have any for this app, but we could. The Spring Boot loader. So yeah, kind of makes sense. So let's see if there's anything else I wanted to cover there before I get off this topic. Nope, that's pretty much it. Oh, yes, there is actually, because we can create a Docker file to do this for us or to incorporate this in some way. And I'm just going to show you what that typically looks like. So from a particular image, I'm using a Microsoft.com OpenJDK Ubuntu image, create a working directory. You can pass in the jar file for an argument, which means you can run it from anywhere, point to anything, and it pulls it in and does all this magic. It copies the jar file in as an application.jar, and then it does layer tools. It's the exact same thing that we just did, right? So then we actually build the final image using the same things. We copy into different directories these layers, and then we set the entry point, and off we go. And notice again, the entry point is using jar launcher. So now that's why I wanted to show you that up front, because it all kind of makes sense when you see the breadcrumb trail, right? And if you get lost along the way, don't feel bad. It's your first time through it. We can talk about this later, or shoot me a text, email, whatever. It's all good. But that's the trail of crimes. It's very methodical. Sometimes you hear folks say, Spring Boot, there's too much magic. There's no magic. It's just logic. And once you start seeing where the breadcrumbs are, you go, oh, that makes a lot of sense. Hopefully. All right. So the next thing we want to do is build that native executable container image, the truly executable, deployable, and then we build the container image around it. So to do that, I'm going to go back here, and we'll go into our POM, and I'm going to just uncomment some things. And we'll go back to the reality here. And then while it's building, I want to do something else because there is time if I play this correctly. Make sure that everything is uncommented or commented properly. So this seems like a lot, right? Because with the 2.7.4 version of boot, there is a lot of extra stuff. This is pre-release native image building, native executable building. But that's where I want to go next, is showing the actual 3.0.0.m5, milestone 5 version, and show you how much different experience that is. So I'm going to save that, and then we'll do basically the same thing here. So, and we'll do a Docker install. Nope, we're good. Okay, so Docker. Oh, actually, I need to do something else. Actually, I need to do a Maven Spring Boot build image. Okay, so now that I have the dependencies in there for native, it's not going to do anything. Oh dear. Okay, so let's see. Oh. Well, this is awkward. Let's see. So I'm missing something. I've obviously overlooked something here. Oh, yeah, I have. That's kind of important. You see what that is? Spring native. It's just telling me, hey, I can't get there from here based on you leaving out an important dependency here. So that will probably work a little better now. Let's hope. And it's using the native image kit, which is based on GraalVM. And I'll go ahead and build this. And this will take a little time, right? So you saw building a Docker image took about 40 seconds when you're using JVM. This will take about 4 minutes-ish, right? Which gives me a little bit of time to talk about a couple of things. In the current version of the Spring Boot, and since you were able to do this, even early stages, building a container image has been a much smoother and better, well-polished process than building it locally, a native image locally on your laptop or desktop or whatever. And there's some reasons for that, right? Because again, that image, that container image, is going to be your deployable of choice in more environments. But it also allows you to use cloud native build packs to pull in all the stuff that you need and work behind the scenes to make sure it gets everything right, versus you're doing a native image build on your local machine that only applies to your local machine, or well, local OS. So it's always been a little bit fiddlier, and that's a little bit of a shame. But with the new version Spring Boot 3, I'll show you the milestone 5, which is not fully baked yet. I mean, we've got some changes that are going to be coming into the actual production version of Spring Boot 3, which is released probably by Spring 1. You've heard of conference-driven development? That's kind of the timeline that we're looking at, and that's kind of an awesome alignment anyway. But that will be the time when you'll see probably roughly around there, hopefully before, the Spring Boot 3 going live, going into production, general availability. But you're going to get a hint of this, a taste of this now, because you can see that this took a little more doing, right? So you had several things you had to include, plugin changes, additional dependencies, and you go through this and it takes some time and you build a container image. Building it locally, like I said, is a bit problematic. So while this is continuing to build, sorry, I kind of went off on a bunny trail there. I want to go ahead and amp this up to 3.0.0 milestone 5. So we're going to look at some, and we don't need this. This just goes away because native executables are built into Spring Boot and the plugin from the get-go, right? It's part of it. You can build JVM, you can build native out of the box with 3.0, which is super, super nice. So that goes away. I'm changing this to 3.0, okay? And I'm just going to change this to all paths native, right? Why not? And we will generate that. And I'll save it down. And we'll go out there and we'll unzip that. And I'll load that up in the IDE. And if you look at the POM, come on, IntelliJ. If you look at the POM, You see right off the bat that you don't really have anything. There's nothing in the native separate library. Everything looks clean. You have your milestones because we're using 3.0.0.milestone5, but once we go live with GA, those disappear. So literally your POM is this, really. A little more, that part at the top too. It's just super clean. I mean, granted, I'm not pulling in many dependencies here, but compared to the other one, it's much shorter, much cleaner. So let's go here, and I'm going to do something that, good thing this isn't recorded, kidding, but I'm going to do something I'm not proud of, but I'm going to do anyway. I'm going to copy paste some code. That always goes well too, right? But I want to just have a level footing here, even playing field. So I'm going to build the same thing, but I'm going to build it locally. So this is, oh, it's done. Let me jump to this really quickly. No, I'm going to go ahead and let's launch forward with this. So, all right. Now I do want to, and this is another reason why I pulled this up, because it's easier to copy paste a few commands here, because we want to use that native image kit locally, since we're going to be building locally in this case. And then I want to do this, and we're going to package this as a native application on my machine, which again has always been fiddly up through 2.x, in this case 2.7.4, but it works brilliantly here. So I love to show this. Oh, I missed the dot. Okay. Oh, come on, what am I doing here? You can do it. Why is that? Oh, keys. Again, I'm not used to using a self-contained keyboard versus an external keyboard. So I'm going to start that building, and we're going to go back over here and look at this. So as I mentioned, it took about 4 minutes on my machine, 3:55. And we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to do a docker run --rm, because that cleans up after we run. That's just a thing that I throw in to demo it. Name, we'll call this all paths native, and then -p 8080, because we want to be able to get to ports. And then we'll grab the name of it once again, the image to build from. And it starts just a smidge faster, right? So you're looking at, well, this is a slow start. It was 11 hundredths, what is it, 115,000, so 115 milliseconds. Sometimes it's faster. I feel sad for it. It's a little slow today. But that's not bad, so let's go ahead and we'll see if we can hit the endpoints again. Randomizer. Come on, you can do it. It just took a little while to get there, I guess. Oh, I am building a native image in another window. I was going to say, seems really weird, but yeah, I guess it kind of makes sense. So, all right, so that's building. It's almost done. So I'm going to stop that. Now, I built a couple images here, and we've run containers off of them. And the difference was what? It was like 1.7 seconds versus 0.1 seconds. So that's a difference of 1.6 seconds. Let me ask you this. Now, that's JVM-based application within a container versus native application, native executable within a container. Does that matter? Everybody's on a quest, including Spring Boot, to provide native executable capabilities. And that's super important in certain use cases. So if you have an application that has to start up and shut down quickly, less than a second, it's going to start up, shut down, and it makes a second look slow, that's critically important. If you have an application that's running for 30 minutes or an hour or for 3 days, or it's always running, let's say you don't have a scale of 0 cloud option, or it doesn't make sense to run it in that regard. Does it matter if it starts in 0.1 seconds or 1.6 seconds, 1.7 seconds? It really doesn't. So one thing that I love about tech is that every time we get a new hammer, you've heard the saying, to the man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. By the way, that applies to women too. If you have a hammer, what do? You run around looking for nails to pound, right? And that's fine. So we grab these new toys, these new tools, these new processes, and we go, let's apply it to everything. So what happens? When we do that, good and bad, by the way, there are good and bad things about that. When we do that, we apply a solution to problems it was never going to work for. It's terrible, it's ill-fitting, it's a waste of time and resources. But what it does allow us to do is find those use cases where it makes a lot of sense. And then hopefully we're wise enough to go, well, I tried it in 10 situations. It worked great in 3, okay in a couple, and worked terribly in the other 5. So going forward, let's use it in these 3. And sometimes those 2 that it works okay in. But definitely use it in these 3, but not those other 5, right? So I'm constantly reminding myself and everybody that we still have a brain, we're still expected to use it, they pay us to use our brains. So if it makes sense and this works for you to build native executables, to build images or local native executables that are solo, that's great, do that, but don't kill yourself to do that when it doesn't make sense, logical sense to do that. So let's see, did this build? Oh yes, it did. Okay, so that's good. So if I just do this, ls target, and actually do an ls-l target, that helps. So we see that we have, once again, 744, but we just have all paths native. There's no jar, there's no anything. And that's because it truly is an executable, right? It's platform specific. It runs on Darwin, on Mac OS, but it won't run on Linux, it won't run on Windows. So that might be super useful to you. It might be not useful at all. Chances are, in most cases, you're going to be building a Docker image, and of course that's built on Linux in this case, but it's going to be any place it'll run a container image, build a container from it. We'll be fine with that. So again, it's good to have options, as I like to say. So if we just do the target all paths, as you might expect, it starts up. Interestingly, if you remember what it took to start the Docker container built on the image with a native executable, it was actually faster than that. I mean, you do the math. I find that kind of fascinating. Again, it puts another kind of option in your favor if you're having to build container images. It kind of makes sense, and it's faster. So, all right, so let's go ahead and just make sure this all connects and everything works. Yep, and we'll do a /randomizer, and it all works. Of course it works, because again, things never go wrong in demos. All right, so let me just make sure there's nothing I missed. Everything's good there, and we are out of time. So I'm going to go back and wrap up. Those are really the things that I wanted to show. Those are the big things, right? And make sure, will this go back to the beginning if I hit this play button? It doesn't, good, okay. I use PowerPoint sometimes and Keynote others, and you just never know what you're gonna wind up with at times when you have to switch between. So if you want to know more, what I usually say is follow me on Twitter, because I share everything. So if you wanna know more, follow me there. If you have questions, comments, or feedback, the best way to reach me. The Spring Boot book information is out there, the bit.ly link, or you can just follow it on Twitter as well. But the repo, and I say all code is here. I actually don't have the 3.0.0.m5 code out there, but I will be adding it. So star and watch the repo, as you can see that, as well as when I make changes. Things are fluid. Obviously, they're stabilizing because we have milestone releases now going into the final GA releases, but they're not fully baked yet, so there will be changes, and I will be updating it to accommodate. So with that, I guess all that remains is to say thank you very much. If you have any questions, I think we have like 2 minutes left. And if you, again, like me, think of them 10 minutes afterward, just ping me. It's all good. Twitter, email, whatever. So with that, I guess we're done. Thanks so much for coming. If anybody has any questions, you want to stick around and ask, that's great. If not, again, think of them later and ping me. So, Beto.
Current view of performance on long-running applications, it doesn't matter
Great question. JVM versus native?
Yes.
Yes, that's a frequent question. Early on, when everybody was super excited about go native, go native, go native, it was relatively speaking much worse throughput. I'll put it that way. Memory obviously was much less, but your throughput was much worse. So if you needed maximum throughput, you always remained with JVM-based applications. They're closing that gap. I don't think it's fully closed, but it's getting better. So I don't know that that's going to be an issue much longer, but I still kind of use that as a rule of thumb as well. JVM-based apps are faster to iterate through, build, test. You can now test with with native executables as well, or native build to native. But generally speaking, you have a slight throughput edge still on your JVM. So I still use that as a rule of thumb until they can pass it, which I don't know will ever happen. It's good luck, but yeah, sure. I guess we're out. But if anybody has any questions, again, ping me on email, ping me on Twitter, happy to answer them. I like to code, I like to talk, so obviously. With that, I will turn it over to my esteemed colleague, and I will get out of the way. So thanks again.